Eternal and holy God, you are the author of all good thinking. Give to us good thoughts by the might of Jesus. Amen. We're with Dr. Paul Ayris again, discussing the relationship between the crown and the primate. How does Cranmer react to the shifting from Henry to Edward to Mary? As Metropolitan of the province of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer was able to call upon the services of the Bishop of London as Dean of the province. That's a new development in my thinking. I didn't know he's the Dean. Between 1539 and 49, the Dean was the noted conservative Edmund Bonner. During this time, 10 special mandates were transmitted throughout the province. The dates of the dispatch are known for 9 of them. 4 were dispatched by Bonner's officials within 1 day of receipt, 1 within 2 days, 2 within 3 days, 1 within 4 days, and 1 for more than 4 days. Such mandates related to general processions, royal visitation of 1547, and changes in liturgy and ceremonies. For the first 2.5 years of Edward VI's reign, Bonner was able to accommodate himself to the government's religious policies. He was in trouble with the authorities, however, concerning his attitude to the royal visitation of 1547. Nevertheless, he performed his duties as Dean of the province. On May 4, an intimation was dispatched to the Archbishop concerning the visitation. The Archbishop transmitted it to the Bishop of London, 15 May. The following day, the intimation was sent to the diocesan bishops. Bonner's attitude earned him a spell of confinement in the Fleet from 12 to 27 September, but he was entirely free by October 23. Throughout 1548 and early 1549, Bonner maintained outward conformity. He performed his role of Dean of the province in transmitting orders for the abolition of all images and ashes and palms. There were problems over the orders concerning ashes and palms in January 1548. Bonner received instructions from the Archbishop and questioned Cranmer's authority to promulgate them. Unfortunately, the text of Bonner's protest has not survived. In reply, the Archbishop emphasized that he had not sent the command to Bonner on his own authority, but at the behest of the council. Cranmer also stressed that his instructions were not contrary to the proclamation that is now set forth, but doth stand with the same. This is a mysterious statement, but it is clear that neither the government nor the Archbishop was prepared to let Bonner stand in the way of reform. It looks very much as though Bonner was sent special instructions to ensure his conformity. Bonner's episcopal register contains in manuscript a copy of this proclamation, 6 February 1548, which forbids private innovation in ceremonies. This copy contains a paragraph not included in the printed schedule to the effect that the abolition of ceremonies of ashes and palms and candles at Candlemas was no private innovation. Rather, any command which the most reverend Father in God, the Archbishop of Canterbury, by his Majesty's will and commandment hath declared, or hereafter shall declare to other bishops by his writing under seal, is to be reputed for the observation and following of the same, as though commanded by his Majesty's injunctions. So we see Tom here playing the imperialist as well for reform. Guided thus, Bonner duly performed his duty and sent the Archbishop's instructions to all the bishops on 28 January. Although a noted conservative, Bonner was not able to use his position as dean of the province to frustrate reform. John Dudley, Earl of Warwick, 1549 to 1553. A coup in the closing months of 1549 removed Somerset from the center of government. By the end of November, John Dudley, Earl of Warwick, had embraced the reformed cause to secure power. He was driven into an unlikely alliance with Thomas Cranmer as Archbishop. Cranmer needed Warwick's support in the council to block conservative efforts to destroy the religious reforms he had introduced. Warwick needed Cranmer and his influence over the young king to achieve power. By 2 February 1550, Warwick stood supreme in the council. Although his espousal of the Reformed religious clause was dictated largely by political objectives, his support for Cranmer enabled the Primate to proceed with doctrinal reform. The traditional picture of Warwick portrays him as scheming and self-serving. Some modern historians, however, have begun to revise their appreciation of his role. It is clear that the task of revision should continue, since the results to date are tentative and not conclusive. It is clear that Thomas Cranmer's register can throw useful rays of light on this area of current research. Book of Common Prayer came into use on Whit Sunday, 1549. The choice of such a festival was highly symbolic, since the Christian feast celebrates the gift of the Holy Spirit to the apostles. The process which led to the final form of the Book of Common Prayer is shrouded in mystery. In September 1548, a number of bishops and other clerics met at Chertsey and Windsor to discuss the draft of Thomas Cranmer's first Book of Common Prayer, to which they seem to have given their general consent. Anthony Sparrow's Rationale, in an edition published in 1722, gives as its frontispiece an engraved print of Thomas Cranmer and his colleagues engaged in the task of composition. This highly subjective depiction of the process of editorial activity in the book rests on no firm documentary evidence. It is surely correct, however, in placing the Archbishop at the head of the table as the main author of the work. The use of the new liturgy was enforced by an Act of Uniformity, which established the Book of Common Prayer as the only legal form of worship. The act was less harsh than the Act of 6 Articles, and the Reformed liturgy was used even by priests who, like Robert Parkin in Yorkshire, were of a distinctively conservative temperament. On Somerset's fall in 1549, the Protector's ruin led to a revival of those hopes which had inspired the Devonshire rebels to demand the restoration of Latin services and the 6 Articles. Earlier that year, people wished again to have their conjured bread and water with such-like vain and sumptuous ceremonies, and acted as though the publication of the Book of Common Prayer had been the responsibility of Somerset alone. In December, Warwick, Cranmer, and the Privy Council acted to reassert their position to kill the conservative threat to their policies. A proclamation dated 25 December was issued ordering all Roman service books to be surrendered. The Privy Council also sent letters missive to the bishops, entrusting them part of the responsibility for enforcing the policy. The letters are signed by Cranmer himself and 5 others. In the letter, Edward is made to assert that he considers the said book to be our act and fact of the whole state of our realm assembled together in Parliament. A political doctrine which Thomas Cromwell himself would have approved. Cranmer, as Archbishop, was ordered to ensure that his officials surrendered immediate upon receipt hereof of all books of service, the keeping whereof should be a let to the use of the said Book of Common Prayer. Cranmer did not act on these instructions until 14 February 1550. The cause of the delay is difficult to understand. Certainly, Thomas Thirlby's Westminster Register shows that his diocesan officials acted with speed. On December 28, a mandate was dispatched to the Archdeacon of Middlesex, ordering him to enforce the policy. Cranmer himself may have wished to wait for the full legislative program to be in place. The revised ordinal was not issued until March 1550, although as early as 31 December 1549, Cranmer and Ridley celebrated an ordination after that which was soon established. Perhaps more importantly, the stipulations of the Privy Council letter in 1549 were supported by a statute in 1550, which laid down that all Roman service books were to be delivered by June 30 to secure secular officials, who were enjoined to give them to the Archbishop within 3 months. On February 1550, Cranmer began to call in all Roman service books. He sent instructions to the Dean of Canterbury telling him to inform the cathedral chapter and diocesan clergy to surrender all such books within 9 days at the Archbishop's Palace in Canterbury. He also sent instructions to John Butler, his commissary general in the town and marches of Calais. Their parish priests were given 6 days' notice to surrender Roman service books. Cranmer's influence over Warwick began to wane. By the end of 1551, the Archbishop had fallen from favor. Between April 1552 and June 1653, Cranmer was present at only 18 out of 218 meetings of the Privy Council. Cranmer acknowledged later the enmity between Warwick and himself. In a letter to Queen Mary, he portrayed Warwick as seeking long time my destruction. Although Warwick had used Cranmer in the crucial months of October 1549 to 1550, he was not the man to let this cloud his long-term judgment. Warwick's avowed aim in the administration of policy was to resolve the financial crisis that Somerset had caused. To have His Majesty out of debt was Warwick's personal goal. In the process, Warwick attempted to line his own pockets too. As early as March 1551, the Privy Council admitted that forasmuch as the King's Majesty has need presently of a mass of money, commissioners shall be empowered to siege the church's plate. Warwick's self-appointed tasks, however, were not to the Archbishop's liking. In 1552, Cranmer was criticized at court for not proceeding on a royal commission. He wrote to Cecil that the cause of my stay and commission is because that all the gentlemen and justices of the peace of Kent, which be in commission with me, be now at London. The letter is dated 20 November. The evidence of the patent roll suggests that the terms of the commission were financial. The offending commission, albeit dated on the roll, directs the recipient to stop the alienation of goods from churches. In 1553, the work of confiscation began. Ridsley's Chronicle and Greyfriars Chronicle describe how the work progressed. Cranmer was unable to resist such policies, and his register reveals that routine financial administration between his officials and those in the government also continued. February 15th, 53, the registry at Lambeth made a return to the court of first fruits and tenths concerning the vicarage of Linstead. The text of Thomas Cranmer's register, along with supporting evidence, throws useful rays of light on Warwick's role in government. Warwick used Cranmer to establish his hold on power. A rift soon developed between the men which never healed. Warwick's fiscal demands were directed toward the re-establishment of the royal finances upon a firm basis. In the process, Warwick also lined his own pockets at the expense of the church. Given Cranmer's distaste in implementing Warwick's financial policies, it is difficult to accept the revisionist line that Warwick wished to strip the episcopate of its wealth in order to create a body of Protestant pastors. Following his retreat from national politics by the end of 1551, Cranmer concentrated on theological reform and took a larger part in the administration of his diocese and province. Between 1551 and 56, 7 bishops were consecrated: William Knight, Bath and Wells, John Wakeman of Gloucester, John Chamber of Peterborough, Arthur Bulkley of Bangor, Paul Bush of Bristol, George Day of Chichester, and Anthony Kitchen of Llandaff. The name of the consecrator is known in 6 cases. Only once did the Archbishop perform the consecration. Cranmer presided at the ceremony when John Wakeman was consecrated Bishop of Gloucester. Between 1547 and 1553, 8 were consecrated as bishops: Nicholas Ridley of Rochester, Robert Farrar of St. David's, John Ponet of Rochester, John Hooper of Gloucester, Miles Coverdale of Exeter, John Scory of Rochester, John Taylor of Lincoln, John Harley of Hereford. 5 of these consecrations were performed in the period 1551 to 53. In 7 cases, Thomas Cranmer's register shows that the Archbishop presided at the ceremony of consecration. Clearly, our bishop became more involved in routine administration following his withdrawal from national politics. It was not just Warwick's policies which caused Cranmer to spend more time in matters of ecclesiastical administration. The implementation of reform required more attention. The Revised Ordinal, published in 1550, restricted the orders to those of bishop, priest, and deacon. Although conservative work, its publication marks a significant stage in the evolution and enforcement of religious and doctrinal reform in England. Priests were no longer charged to offer sacrifice to the Mass Rather, they were told to preach and minister the sacraments to the congregation. The first occasion on which the revised ordinal was used was the consecration of bishops. On Sunday, 29 June 1550, in the chapel at Lambeth. That service, the Archbishop celebrated the communion service from the Book of Common Prayer, 1549. John Ponet was then consecrated according to the rites of the revised ordinal. The service, Thomas Cranmer as Archbishop and Metropolitan duly performed the consecration using the Reformed liturgies he'd helped to draw up, assisted by the bishops of London and Bangor. Revision of the liturgy was only one of the projects on which the Archbishop was engaged after his withdrawal from national politics. He'd been long concerned with the compilation of series of articles expressing the norms of religious belief. In 1538, a series of 13 articles had been drawn up by a group of English and Lutheran divines. In 1553, a series of 42 articles was issued. Although the product of the committee, there was little doubt that the Archbishop was largely responsible for the production. In their rejection of medieval Catholicism, the articles undoubtedly propound Reformed religion. They betray the influence of continental theology, and the denunciation of Anabaptist ideas is also prominent. No fewer than 18 articles being directed against such tenets. Edward VI died on 6 July 1553. On 19 June, Cranmer's register shows that the Archbishop began the task of encouraging his clergy to subscribe to the articles. On that day, the Primate instructed the Dean of the Deanery of the Arches to assemble all the clergy of the deanery before him in the hall of Lambeth Palace on 23 June. The Deanery of the Arches was outside the control of the Bishop of London and under the bishop's immediate supervision. The Dean of Arches was to tell all those possessing ecclesiastical office that they would receive instruction when they assembled at Lambeth. Unhappily, no trace of this verbal instruction survives in the register. Presumably, the Archbishop sent similar instructions to his Archdean for the Diocese of Canterbury. John Gibbon, commissary of the Dean of Arches, certified to the Archbishop on 22 June that he had duly cited those named in the mandate to appear before the Archbishop of Lambeth. One Richard Clooney, a parator, had cited them in each parish in the deanery on 21 and 22 June. A number of parish priests were not present when Clooney summoned them. No reason for their absence is recorded. Those absent were the rectors of St. Mary Le Bow, St. Pancras, All Hallows Lombard Street, St. John the Evangelist in Watling Street, and St. Dunstan in the east. Given that Edward VI had less than 2 weeks to live, it's remarkable to note that the official Reformation was still being enforced in the parishes. The evidence of the register, however, suggests that this was the Archbishop's last act in the promotion of reform at the parish level. It is unclear how far the battle to win the hearts and minds of men in the localities had been won. The prosecution of heresy, 1547 to 1553. The religious settlement of the years 1547 to 53 proved to be unsatisfactory in two ways. Conservatives found the doctrinal liturgy of the Book of Common Prayer too great a departure from the received orthodoxy of the Western Church. Many who embraced Reformed theology had felt that the work had not progressed far enough. The lack of an authoritative revision of canon law hampered those who wished to enforce the new orthodoxy. Thomas Cromwell had supervised the reform of the legal code in the 1530s. To a degree, this was a conservative piece of work, but the text was indeed designed to replace the papal code. Thomas Cranmer was largely responsible for producing a document now known as the Reformatio Legum Ecclesiasticarum. This was a revised code of canon law which would have made much of the received teaching of the Western Church open to prosecution as heresy. Cranmer had been empowered to work on the project since 1544. Thomas Cranmer presented a copy of the code to Parliament in March 1553, where John Warwick's intervention killed the project. Warwick's view probably is reflected in a passage of Edward VI's journal. The reform of canon law could not be entrusted to bishops, for they were either papists or ignorant, aged, or wicked. It was not simply Warwick's dislike of Cranmer which led to the failure of the scheme. Secular lawyers were certainly opposed to any reform of canon law at the hands of ecclesiastics. The contemporary legal treatise of the 1540s, for example, praised common law over canon and civil law. The highest gift a prince might receive would be 10 such justices as the Lord Chancellor. Roman civil lawyers had profited from the eclipse of the canonists. Henry VIII had abolished the study of canon law at the universities. Consequently, the law administered in the church's hierarchy of the courts was increasingly influenced by civil law. Doctors' Commons in London performed a function for civil lawyers identical to that of the Inns of Court for common lawyers. Civil lawyers, therefore, had much to fear from a revised legal code based on the insights of Reformed theology. Although all attempts to reform the medieval code of canon law came to nothing, the prosecution of heresy continued throughout Edward's reign. During this period, Cranmer's register shows that the most immediate challenge to religious settlement came from the Anabaptists. The Treason Act of 1547 repealed all legislation concerning heresy. Through further acts of Parliament, proclamations, directives from the Privy Council, and royal and episcopal injunctions, a new orthodoxy was defined and rigorously enforced. The main task of enforcing prosecution of heresy was left not to diocesan bishops and their audience courts, but to special commissioners appointed by the Crown. An analysis of the names of those appointed at the commission shows that the task of enforcing obedience was entrusted to laymen, as well as the spiritual estate. On January 18, 1551, for example, a royal commission was issued to Thomas Cranmer as Archbishop of Canterbury and 31 others to inquire into heresies and to enforce the Book of Common Prayer. The minimum number of judges in any prosecution was to be 3, provided that one of the following preside at the trial: Archbishop of Canterbury, Bishops of Ely, Thomas Goodrich; London, Nicholas Ridley; Lincoln, Henry Holbeach; Norwich, Thomas Thirlby; Rochester, John Ponet, Nicholas Wotton, Dean of Canterbury and Privy Councillor, and Sir William Peter or Sir William Cecil, Richard Cox, the King's Almoner, Sir James Hales, or William May, Dean of St. Paul's. Here we'll draw that to a close. Glory be to the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost.